Evan Hale had learned to measure time in docking cycles and warning sirens. On Rimfall Station, nothing truly belonged to anyone except the thin slice of air the station paid to recycle. Everything else was rented, sleep pods, work shifts, even quiet. The station hung above a dim brown moon like a tired coin that refused to fall. Freighters came and went in slow, careful lines. Smaller ships clung to the outer rings, their hull lights blinking like cold fireflies. Inside, the corridors were always crowded. Traders argued in a dozen languages. Mechanics crawled out of maintenance panels covered in grease. Pilgrims stared at the stars as if the stars owed them answers. And security drones floated past, always watching, always pretending they were. Evan wore the same gray work jacket every day, the fabric rubbed smooth at the elbows. He loaded cargo by hand when the cranes jammed, because on Rimfall, machines broke often and people were cheaper. His muscles ached in steady, familiar ways. He didn't hate the work. He hated how the station made everyone feel like a small, replaceable part. Lunch was the best part of his day, not because the food was great. It was. Rimfall sold Nutri-Bricks and protein sheets and other things with names that sounded like building materials. But Evan had a habit of improving anything he could. On payday, he bought real bread from a small kiosk run by an old Martian woman who always winked like she knew a secret. He traded favors for a packet of smoked salt from a pilot who owed him. And once, a traveling cook from a water world had shown him how to mix simple station paste with spice and make it taste like something that belonged on a planet with oceans and sunlight. Today, he had built himself a sandwich the way he liked it. Thick bread, a slice of preserved meat, crunchy greens grown in hydro towers, and a smear of tangy sauce he'd been saving. He carried it to a quiet alcove near the maintenance hatch of Dock Ring C, where a cracked viewport showed a narrow strip of stars. He sat, unwrapped his lunch, and took a bite that made him close his eyes for a second. Simple pleasure, honest pleasure. It mattered more out here. That was when he noticed her. She stood a few steps away from his alcove, half hidden behind a column of old piping. At first, Evan thought she was just another traveler waiting for someone, but something about her stillness made the busy corridor around her look louder. People passed and didn't bump into her, as if they moved without knowing why. Even a pair of arguing merchants lowered their voices when they came near, then picked the argument back up once they'd gone. She was young, at least she looked young in the way aliens sometimes did, caught between human guesses and alien truth. Her skin was a pale shade that reminded Evan of moonstone, not bright but soft. Her hair, if it was hair, fell in dark, silky strands down her back. She wore simple robes the color of worn paper, without jewelry or badges or obvious wealth. No luggage. Her eyes were what held him. Large, calm, and distant, like someone watching the world from behind glass. Evan had seen that look before. On people who had been traveling too long, on kids who had lost someone, on workers who had learned to stop hoping for better shifts. She looked hungry too, not just for food, hungry in a deeper way. Evan chewed, swallowed, and tried to ignore it. Rimfall was full of sad stories. If you carried all of them, your spine would snap. But he kept looking anyway. The young alien woman glanced toward the vending wall nearby. A row of machines blinked with bright ads and dull snacks. She stared at the prices. Her posture stayed straight, proud, but her fingers tightened slightly at her side. Then she looked away as if the machines had offended her. Evan sighed through his nose. He told himself it wasn't his problem. Then he remembered a time, years ago, when he'd arrived at Rimfall with a torn bag and not enough credits for a meal. Someone had slid a pack of crackers across a table without a word. That small kindness had kept him from doing something desperate. He unwrapped the sandwich a little more, tore it cleanly in half, and stood up. He walked over slowly, making sure his footsteps weren't aggressive. "Hey," he said, keeping his voice light. "You want some?" The young woman blinked as if she hadn't expected anyone to speak to her. Her gaze flicked from his face to the half sandwich in his hand, then back again. For a second, her expression was unreadable, surprise, suspicion, and something like embarrassment. "I do not have currency," she said, her accent precise but gentle. The words sounded carefully chosen, as if she had learned them from a tutor. Evan shrugged. "Not selling it, just offering. It's lunch. People eat lunch." She studied him for a long moment. Evan could almost feel the weight of that attention, like a scanner passing over him. The corridor noise faded in his awareness. He became aware of his grease-stained hands and the small tear on his jacket sleeve and the fact he probably smelled like cargo bay dust. "I do not understand," she said quietly. Evan smiled, a little awkward. "That's okay. You don't have to understand. You can just take it if you want." Her gaze went to the sandwich again. Evan held it out, careful not to move too quickly. After another pause, she lifted her hands and accepted it with a kind of cautious respect, like it might be ceremonial. "Thank you," she said. Evan motioned toward his alcove. "You can sit there if you want. It's quieter." She hesitated, then followed him. When she sat, she did it with perfect posture, robes settling neatly. She looked like she belonged on a statue more than on a station bench. Evan sat across from her, unwrapped his half, and took a bite. He made sure to chew casually to show her it was normal. She lifted her half sandwich and looked at it as if it was a strange device. "It won't explode," Evan said. "Probably." A tiny flicker touched her eyes, almost a smile. She took a careful bite. At first, she chewed like she was analyzing it. Then her eyes widened just a fraction. She took another bite, slightly bigger. Evan watched her eat and tried not to stare too hard. He had met dozens of species on Rimfall. Some ate with mouthparts, some with tendrils, some through skin membranes. But she ate like a human, more or less. That didn't mean she was close to human. Space was full of coincidences, but it made the moment feel less alien. "What's your name?" he asked. She paused mid-chew. "Lyra," she said after a heartbeat. "Lyra," Evan repeated. "Nice, I'm Evan." She nodded slowly as if saving the information. "Evan." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to distant machinery hum. A cargo tram rattled somewhere above them. Station announcements whispered about docking assignments and customs checks. Lyra looked toward the viewport and the thin strip of stars. "This station is loud," she said. "Yeah," Evan agreed. "Rimfall not known for peace and quiet." "It feels," she said, searching for the word, "unfinished." Evan laughed softly. "That's one way to put it. They keep adding rings and corridors and patching things up. It's like a ship that never lands." Lyra took another bite. Her hands were steady, but her eyes kept moving, taking in details. The graffiti scratched into the bench, the tiny stain on the wall, the way light flickered at the ceiling panel. Evan tried a different question. "You traveling through?" "I am away," she said. "Away from where?" She looked at him, then down at the sandwich as if the bread could answer. "From expectation," she said finally. Evan blinked. That wasn't the kind of answer he usually got. Most people said, from debt, from war, from family, from boredom. Expectation sounded heavier. "Well," he said, choosing his words, "Rimfall is a pretty good place to hide from anything, I guess. Nobody cares who you are unless you cause trouble." Lyra's mouth tightened slightly, like the idea was both comforting and sad. "They care," she said. "They always care." Evan didn't argue. Plenty of eyes cared on Rimfall, security, smugglers, recruiters. But most of the time, if you kept your head down, you could live without being noticed. He wondered what kind of life made someone believe there was no escape from attention. A group of station security officers marched by the corridor entrance, their boots in perfect rhythm. Evan barely noticed. Security moved everywhere. Lyra noticed. Her gaze flicked to them and then away like she was pretending not to. Her fingers tightened around the sandwich for a second, then relaxed. Evan leaned back. "So, you like it?" She glanced at him. "The food?" "Yeah." She took another bite, slower now. "It is warm," she said. "In a way I did not expect." Evan smiled. "That's bread for you?" Lyra shook her head slightly. "Not the bread." Evan stopped smiling, not because she'd said something wrong, but because she sounded honest in a way that made him uncomfortable. People on Rimfall lied to survive. This girl sounded like she didn't practice lying much. "Do you have somewhere to go?" he asked. "I have a room," she said. "A place assigned." "Assigned by who?" Evan asked before he could stop himself. Lyra's eyes sharpened just briefly, then she smoothed her expression. "By those who travel with me," she said. Evan frowned. She didn't look like she had anyone traveling with her. But maybe they were nearby, watching. It wasn't unusual for rich passengers to send guards ahead. He tried to sound casual. "Well, if you've got people, that's good." "Rimfall can chew you up if you're alone." She looked down again. "I am alone," she said softly. Evan didn't know what to say to that because she had said it like a fact, not a complaint. Like the sky was black and water was wet and she was alone. He took another bite of his sandwich, searching for a way to lighten the mood. "Okay," he said after a moment. "I'll ask something easier. What brings you to Rimfall besides expectation?" Lyra's eyes drifted to the stars. I wanted to see what ordinary life looks like, she said. Evan snorted. Then you picked the wrong station. Perhaps, she said, but she didn't sound convinced. She looked around again, watching workers hurry past with toolkits and tired faces. They move with purpose, she murmured. They choose small things, food, rest, conversation. Yeah, Evan said, it's not glamorous, but it's real. Lyra's gaze returned to him. Do you enjoy it? Evan paused. Nobody asked that question out here, not seriously. I don't know if enjoy is the word, he said. Some days I hate it, some days it's fine, but I like making small things better, like my lunch, like helping someone fix a jammed door, stuff like that. Lyra watched him as if he had said something important. Small things matter, she said. Sometimes, Evan said with a shrug. Sometimes small things are all you've got. She finished her half sandwich. She didn't rush. When she swallowed the last bite, she held the empty wrapping carefully like she didn't want to waste it. Evan crumpled his own wrapper into a ball without thinking. Then he noticed her still holding hers and felt a sudden, odd embarrassment. You can toss it, he said. There's a recycler bin over there. She nodded, stood, and walked to the bin with controlled grace. When she returned, Evan realized something else. As she moved, people subtly shifted out of her path. Not dramatically. Not like they were afraid, more like they were careful, like they wanted to be respectful without showing it. Evan frowned again. Maybe she really did have guards nearby. When she sat down, she looked lighter, like the food had done more than fill her stomach. For the first time, she leaned back slightly instead of sitting perfectly straight. Evan chuckled. See, you're not going to float away if you relax. She looked at him, and this time a small smile appeared, brief but real. Then her gaze landed on the patch on his jacket, a faded symbol of dock ring. See, you work here, she said. Yeah, Evan replied. Cargo, mostly heavy stuff. Sometimes weird stuff. Weird? Last week a guy tried to ship a crate full of ceremonial stones. Turned out it was just rocks with fake glow paint, Evan said. Before that, someone smuggled live fish in a coolant tank. Don't ask me how. Lyra's smile grew slightly, like she was collecting these little human stories. You speak as if life is, she searched again, manageable. Evan thought about his cramped sleep pod, his overdue bills, the way his back hurt when he bent the wrong way. He thought about how easy it would be for Rimfall to swallow him forever. It's not always manageable, he admitted. But you do what you can, you get through the day, you make a decent sandwich, you share it if someone looks hungry. Lyra stared at him for a long moment. Her eyes were bright in the dim light. Evan shifted, suddenly self-conscious. What? He asked. You offered without request, she said. Yeah, Evan said, confused. So? That is not common, she said, voice low. Evan shrugged. It should be. Lyra looked away, and Evan saw the faintest tension at her jaw, like she was holding back something heavy. A soft chime echoed from the corridor. An announcement rolled over the speakers. A docking delay, a customs warning, the usual noise of Rimfall. But beneath it, Evan heard something else, a subtle change in the station's rhythm. The hallway outside their alcove had fewer people now. The passing crowd thinned in a way that didn't feel natural. Evan leaned slightly to look past the column. Far down the corridor, a pair of security drones hovered at a new angle, their lenses facing toward this section. Near them, two figures stood apart from the flow of traffic, tall, still, wearing plain cloaks that didn't match the station's usual fashion. Their faces were shadowed, but Evan felt their attention like a pressure on the air. He turned back to Lyra. Are your travel people around? He asked, trying to keep his voice casual. Lyra's fingers curled lightly in her lap. Yes, she said. Evan didn't like the way she said it. Not like someone protected, more like someone monitored. He tried to lighten the moment again because that was what he did when tension crept close. He nodded at her serious face and said, You know, you've got this look like you could run the whole station if you wanted. Lyra blinked. Evan grinned. Like you're secretly in charge of everything. For half a second, something flashed in her expression, surprise, pain, and a strange amusement that didn't reach her eyes. I am not in charge of this station, she said carefully. Good, Evan said, leaning back. Then you don't have to deal with Rimfall's paperwork. That stuff could break a person. Lyra exhaled softly, almost a laugh. It was the smallest sound, but it felt like a crack in a wall. Evan felt oddly proud, like he had done something useful. Then the lights overhead flickered once, just once, and held steady again. A normal station glitch. Except the corridor fell quieter for a heartbeat afterward, like everyone had paused to listen. Evan noticed the cloaked figures down the hall had moved closer. Not fast, controlled, deliberate. Lyra's gaze stayed forward, but her shoulders tightened slightly under her robes. Evan's smile faded. "Hey," he said softly, "if you're in trouble—" "I am not," Lyra said quickly, too quickly. Then she added calmer, "Not the kind you mean." Evan didn't know what that meant, but he didn't like it. He stood up, stretching his stiff legs, and tried to act normal. "Well," he said, "I should get back to work. Cargo doesn't load itself, sadly." Lyra stood too, smooth and quiet. She looked at him as if she wanted to say something important but didn't know how. "Thanks for the sandwich," she said. Evan waved a hand. "Anytime, just eat, okay? Don't let Rimfall turn you into one of those people who forget food exists." Her lips curved again, small and sincere. "I will remember," she said, and the way she said it made Evan think she meant more than lunch. They stepped out of the alcove together. The corridor was still thinner than before. The drones hovered in place. The cloaked figures were closer now, their steps silent. Evan glanced at them, then back at Lyra. "Your friends?" he asked under his breath. Lyra didn't answer right away. Then she said, even quieter, "They are not my friends." Evan's stomach tightened. Before he could respond, one of the cloaked figures stopped a respectful distance away and dipped their head, not toward Evan, but toward Lyra. The gesture was subtle, almost invisible, but it carried weight. The second figure mirrored it. Their hands remained hidden in their sleeves. Evan frowned, confused. "Are they bowing to you?" Lyra's eyes flicked to him, and for a second she looked young and tired and very far from home. "Please," she said softly, "do not draw attention." Evan opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no idea what was going on, but he could feel it. The air had changed. The station's usual chaos had become careful around them, like a crowd making room for something dangerous or important. Evan forced a grin because that was his shield. "Okay," he said lightly. "No attention, just two people walking, totally normal." Lyra nodded once, grateful. They began walking down the corridor, side by side. Evan kept his pace steady, pretending he wasn't watching the drones or the cloaked figures trailing behind at a measured distance. As they moved, Evan caught sight of a station display screen ahead. It was usually filled with ads and docking schedules. For a moment the image glitched, lines flickering. Then it returned to normal. But Evan could have sworn that in that flicker he saw a symbol, an elegant crest he didn't recognize before it vanished. He looked at Lyra. She kept her eyes forward, calm on the surface, but her hands were clenched again. Evan didn't know who she was, not really. He only knew she had eaten half a sandwich like it mattered, and she had smiled like she didn't get many chances to. He told himself that was enough. Still, as they walked, the feeling followed him, like the station itself was holding its breath, like the galaxy had leaned slightly closer to listen to something small and human that had just happened on a worn-out bench near a cracked viewport. And Evan, without understanding why, had the sudden, ridiculous thought that maybe his stupid joke had been closer to the truth than he realized. The corridor lights cast long white lines across the floor as Evan and Lyra walked side by side. The hum of the station felt louder now, as if every vent and engine knew something important was happening and wanted to be heard. Evan kept his hands in his jacket pockets, trying to look like just another worker heading back to a job he didn't love. Behind them, the two cloaked figures followed at a careful distance. They did not rush. They did not speak. They moved like shadows that had learned how to wear boots. Evan leaned slightly toward Lyra. "So," he whispered, "is this the part where you tell me you're secretly a famous singer or a runaway royal or something?" Lyra's lips twitched, but her eyes stayed forward. "If I told you," she said softly, "you would not believe me." Evan huffed quietly. "Fair enough. People tell weird stories on Rimfall all the time." They passed a row of closed shops, metal shutters pulled down like tired eyelids. A small cleaning drone rolled past them, its brushes spinning, its sensors flicking from Evan to Lyra to the figures behind them. It paused for a half-second, then hurried on. The station felt like it was making space. Evan didn't like that feeling. They turned into a side corridor that led toward the living quarters. The traffic here was lighter. The air smelled faintly of recycled water and old fabric. Evan's boots echoed more than before. Lyra slowed her pace. Evan matched it without thinking. "I did not mean for you to be involved," she said quietly. "Involved in what?" Evan asked. She hesitated. "In my presence." Evan snorted under his breath. "Look, I just gave you a sandwich. I didn't sign up for anything." Lyra looked at him then, really looked at him, and there was something in her eyes that made Evan feel like he was standing on the edge of a very deep drop. You signed up when you treated me like a person, she said. Evan opened his mouth to make a joke, but the words didn't come. They reached a junction where the corridor split into 3 paths. A small sign flickered overhead. Quarters a dock ring access, admin wing. The cloaked figures stopped a few steps back. One of them raised a hand slightly, not in a command, but in a signal. From the shadows near the ceiling, 2 more shapes detached themselves. Not people this time. Drones, sleek and dark with quiet blue lights. Evan's heart kicked harder. Okay, he muttered, now I'm officially uncomfortable. Lyra took a slow breath, her shoulders straightened, not stiff but strong. She turned to face the cloaked figures. You were told to remain at a distance, she said. Her voice was still soft. But it carried. The figures bowed their heads again. One of them spoke, their voice low and respectful. We cannot, Sover. They stopped themselves. Evan froze. Sover what? Lyra closed her eyes for a brief moment. When she opened them, she looked tired, very tired. Not here, she said. The figure nodded. As you wish. Evan stared at her. Did they just call you something? Lyra looked at him, and in that look was a question. Do you really want to know? Before Evan could answer, a sharp chime rang through the corridor. The lights dimmed slightly, then brightened again. A station announcement crackled to life, its voice too calm to be comforting. Attention all citizens, please remain in your current locations. A routine security sweep is in progress. Evan groaned. Yeah, that's never routine. Lyra's fingers brushed the fabric of her robes. They are searching, she said. Searching for you? Evan asked. She didn't answer. The drones near the ceiling shifted position, their blue lights sweeping across the corridor. The cloaked figures moved closer, forming a loose wall between Evan, Lyra, and the open paths. Evan raised his hands a little, palms out. Hey, look, if there's trouble, I can just go. I don't need to be part of. No, Lyra said quickly. She reached out and lightly touched his sleeve. The contact was brief, but it sent a strange warmth through the fabric like standing near a heater. Please, she said, stay. Evan stared at her hand on his arm, then at her face. He didn't understand what was happening. He didn't understand who she was, but he understood the look in her eyes. It was the look of someone who had never been allowed to ask for things. Okay, he said softly. I'm staying. The cloaked figure nearest them tilted their heads slightly, as if surprised. They moved down the corridor toward quarters A. Doors lined the walls, each marked with a number and a small light that glowed green or red depending on occupancy. Most were green. People were staying put like they'd been told. As they walked, Evan noticed small things. The way Lyra's steps were measured, like she had learned to walk in halls that were watched. The way the cloaked figures scanned every corner, every reflection in the polished metal walls. This is a lot of trouble for one person, Evan muttered. Lyra gave a small, sad smile. I am important, she said. Evan laughed quietly. Everyone's important to someone. Lyra looked at him. Not like this. They stopped in front of a door near the end of the corridor. The light above it was blue instead of green or red. The cloaked figure stepped forward and pressed a panel. The door slid open silently. Inside was a room that didn't match the rest of Rimfall. The walls were smooth and clean. The air smelled fresh. Soft light came from hidden panels in the ceiling. A small table stood near a wide viewport that showed the curve of the brown moon below. Evan whistled. This is your assigned place? Lyra nodded. Yeah, Evan said. I definitely don't get assigned places like this. They stepped inside. The door closed behind them with a quiet hiss. The cloaked figures remained outside, standing guard. Evan walked to the viewport and looked out. The moon below was pocked with craters, its surface like old bone. Beyond it, stars burned cold and far away. Nice view, he said. Lyra stood near the center of the room, hands folded in front of her. She looked smaller here somehow, despite the space. You should go, she said. Evan turned. You already tried that. This is different, she said. You have seen enough now to be in danger. Evan crossed his arms. You keep saying things like that, but you're not explaining. Lyra took a breath. She walked to the table and sat down. For the first time since he'd met her, she looked like she was slumping, like the weight she carried was too heavy to hold up all the time. I was not meant to leave my world, she said. I was not meant to walk through stations or eat sandwiches or talk to strangers. Evan leaned against the wall, listening. My people built an empire across the stars, she continued. Not with ships and weapons alone, but with agreements, systems, and control. Over time, they decided that one voice should stand above all others, a symbol, a final authority. Evan's stomach tightened. That voice is mine, Lyra said. Evan stared at her. You're saying you're in charge of an empire? He asked. A coalition, she said. Thousands of worlds, millions of species. Evan laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. Yeah, okay. That's a good one. Lyra didn't smile. She raised her hands slightly. The air in the room shifted. The light bent just a little like heat over metal. For a heartbeat, Evan saw something behind her, something vast and bright, like the outline of a crown made of stars. Then it was gone. Evan's laugh died in his throat. He swallowed. Okay, he said slowly. I'm listening. I was raised in halls where every word I spoke became law, Lyra said, where every smile was studied, where every mistake could start a war. I have never walked through a crowd without guards. I have never eaten without a taster. I have never been alone. Evan thought about the way she had looked at the vending machines, the way she had held the sandwich wrapper. So you ran, he said. I walked away, she corrected. For one day, I wanted to see what it was like to be unnoticed. Evan snorted softly. You picked the wrong galaxy. Lyra smiled just a little. Perhaps, but I found something I did not expect. What's that? Evan asked. You, she said. Evan rubbed the back of his neck. I'm not that impressive. You are, Lyra said. You offered kindness without knowing who I was, without fearing what I could give you in return. Evan looked down at his boots. It was just a sandwich. Lyra leaned forward. It was a choice. A soft knock came at the door. One of the cloaked figures spoke through a hidden speaker. They are moving through the station, they said. Not our people. Lyra's jaw tightened. The council, she said. They will want me returned, quietly if possible, loudly if not. Evan pushed away from the wall. So what happens to me in this scenario? Lyra hesitated. You will be questioned, she said. Watched, perhaps forgotten. Perhaps, Evan repeated. She stood and walked to him. I did not mean to put you in this position. Evan studied her face. The power she talked about wasn't there, not in the way he'd expected. He didn't see a ruler. He saw a person who had never been allowed to be small. Look, he said. I don't know anything about empires. I move boxes for a living. But I know what it's like to feel like you don't belong to yourself. Lyra looked at him, eyes searching. So, Evan continued, if they're coming to take you back somewhere you don't want to be, I don't like that. Lyra's breath caught slightly. You would stand against them. Evan laughed, nervous and honest. I don't have a blaster or a ship or a plan, but yeah, I guess I would. The door panel lit up. The cloaked figure spoke again, more urgently. They are in the wing. Lyra closed her eyes. When she opened them, there was something different in them now. Resolve. I cannot run forever, she said, but I can choose how I return. She looked at Evan. Will you walk with me? Evan took a breath. He thought about Rimfall, his job, his tiny room, his careful little life. Then he thought about the way Lyra had smiled over a half-eaten sandwich like it was the first real thing she'd touched in years. Yeah, he said. I'll walk. The door slid open. The corridor beyond was filled with light. Not harsh, not blinding, but bright enough to make the metal walls glow. At the far end stood a group of figures in clean, formal uniforms, their symbols shining. Drones hovered above them in perfect formation. The cloaked guards stepped aside. Lyra walked forward. Evan walked beside her. Every step felt like walking into a storm. As they moved, people began to peek out of their doors. Whispers followed them. Evan heard words he didn't understand, but he heard the tone. Awe, fear, curiosity. Lyra stopped a few meters from the waiting group. One of them stepped forward, tall and sharp-eyed. They bowed deeply. Sovereign, they said, the word no longer hidden. Evan felt it then, the weight of it, the way the air itself seemed to lean toward her. Lyra didn't bow back. I am not your symbol today, she said. I am myself, the figure hesitated. The council will not accept. They will, Lyra said. Her voice was still gentle, but it did not bend. Evan felt a chill run down his spine. Lyra glanced at him just once. In her eyes was gratitude and something like courage borrowed. Evan straightened his jacket, squared his shoulders, and stood there like he belonged in the middle of history. He had no idea what would happen next, but he knew, somehow, that the galaxy had just noticed a dockworker from Rimfall Station. And that was only the beginning. The corridor felt too small for what was happening inside it. Evan stood beside Lyra as the formal group faced them. Their uniforms were smooth and dark, marked with symbols that looked old and powerful. The drones above them hovered in a perfect line, their lights steady and watchful. The people who had peeked out of their doors now filled the hallway, standing at a careful distance, whispering to one another. Lyra's words still hung in the air. I am not your symbol today. I am myself. The tall figure who had spoken first straightened slowly. Their face was calm, but their eyes showed something like shock. Sovereign, they said again, softer now. The galaxy waits for your voice. You cannot step away from what you are. Lyra did not move. Evan felt her presence beside him like a quiet storm. I am not stepping away, she said. I am stepping forward on my own. A murmur ran through the watching crowd. Evan heard his own name whispered somewhere, though he didn't know how anyone had learned it. The tall figure glanced at Evan, really seeing him for the first time. And who is this? They asked. Evan swallowed. He had faced angry foremen, smugglers, and station security before, but this was different. This felt like standing in front of history itself. I'm just a dock worker, Evan said. Evan Hale, I move boxes and fix jammed doors. The figure studied him like he was a strange object. You stand beside the sovereign as if you are her equal. Evan shrugged, though his heart was beating hard. I stand beside a person. That caused a ripple through the group. Some of the uniformed figures shifted. The drones above hummed slightly louder. Lyra turned her head and looked at Evan. For a moment she looked almost surprised. Then she nodded once. The council called me a voice, Lyra said. A crown. A symbol, but none of those things can eat when they are hungry. None of them can feel the cold of a metal bench or the warmth of a shared meal. She lifted her hand and pointed, not accusing but clear. This human showed me what it means to be small, to be ordinary. To be free even for a moment. The tall figure's jaw tightened. The galaxy does not run on moments. No, Lyra said. It runs on choices. The air felt heavy. Evan could feel eyes on him from every direction. He felt very small and very visible. The tall figure turned to the others in uniform. They spoke in a quiet, fast language Evan did not understand. The others listened, their expressions serious. One of the cloaked guards near the wall shifted their stance just slightly, like they were ready to move if things went wrong. Evan leaned closer to Lyra. I don't know what the plan is, he whispered, but if it involves running, I should tell you now I'm not very fast. Lyra almost smiled. There will be no running, she whispered back. There will be standing. The tall figure stepped forward again. Sovereign, they said, if you do not return with us now, the council will see this as a challenge. Other systems will see it as weakness. There will be fear, there may be conflict. Lyra nodded slowly. There is always fear, there is always conflict. That is what I was raised to manage. She took a step forward. The crowd held its breath. But today, she continued, I choose something else. I choose to show them that power can listen, that authority can learn, that a ruler can walk beside someone with nothing to gain and still find meaning. The tall figure looked at Evan again, this time with something like disbelief. You have no idea what you are part of human. Evan lifted his chin. Maybe not, but I know what I saw. I saw someone who wanted to be treated like a person instead of a throne. A silence fell over the corridor. Even the drones seemed to pause, their hum fading to a near whisper. Then from the back of the crowd, a small voice spoke. I want that too. Evan turned. A young alien child stood in a doorway, holding onto the edge of the frame. Their parents stood behind them, eyes wide, trying to pull them back inside. But the child leaned forward, staring at Lyra. Lyra's breath caught. More murmurs followed, not loud, not angry, just curious. The tall figure closed their eyes briefly. When they opened them, their voice was quieter. This is becoming larger than intended. Lyra nodded. That is what happens when you let people see behind the curtain. The tall figure turned away and spoke into a small device at their wrist. Evan couldn't hear the words, but he could guess who was on the other end. Minutes passed. The corridor felt like it was holding still, frozen in a single frame. Evan's legs began to ache. He shifted his weight and tried to stay steady. Lyra remained perfectly still, but Evan could feel the tension in her like a wire pulled tight. Finally, the tall figure turned back. The council is listening, they said carefully. They will address you directly. One of the drones floated forward. Its surface shimmered and light spread out in front of it, forming a tall, glowing image in the air. Faces appeared in the light, many faces. Different shapes, colors, and forms, some human-like, some not, all serious. Evan's mouth went dry. He had seen broadcasts of the council before, never like this, never this close. Lyra, a voice said. It was layered as if many voices spoke together. You step outside your role. Lyra lifted her chin. I step into it. You endanger balance, the voice said. I seek to change it, Lyra replied. The faces in the light shifted. Some looked angry, some looked thoughtful. And this human, the voice asked. Why does he stand with you? Lyra glanced at Evan. He stood with me when he did not know who I was, she said. He offered without fear. He spoke without calculation. He reminded me that the galaxy I rule is made of lives, not systems. The council's image focused on Evan. He felt like a spotlight had turned on inside his chest. "You," the voice said. "What do you want?" Evan swallowed. He hadn't expected that. "I don't want anything," he said honestly. "I just didn't like seeing someone who looked lonely." The council was silent. "That is not an answer that shapes empires," the voice said. "Maybe it should," Evan replied before he could stop himself. A ripple moved through the faces. Some leaned closer, some pulled back. Lyra's eyes shone. The council spoke again, slower this time. "You ask us to believe that kindness can guide what power cannot." "I ask you to try," Lyra said. The image flickered slightly. The faces began to argue among themselves, their voices overlapping in a storm of sound Evan couldn't follow. He leaned toward Lyra. "Are they always like this?" She nodded faintly. "Always." Time stretched. The crowd whispered. The child in the doorway sat down on the floor, watching like it was a story being told. Finally, the voices in the light fell quiet. "Lyra," the council said, "you will return." "But not as you were." Lyra's shoulders lifted slightly. "Explain." "You will travel," the voice continued. "Not in palaces, not behind walls. You will walk among the worlds you lead. You will see them, speak to them, eat their food, sit on their benches." Evan blinked. "You will be sovereign," the voice said, "and witness." Lyra's breath trembled. "And him?" she asked softly. The image shifted to Evan again. "He will not be bound," the council said. "He will not be taken. He will be remembered." Evan frowned. "That sounds worrying." Lyra almost laughed. "You will be called the first voice," the council continued. "The one who spoke without power and was heard." Evan stared. "I really don't need a title." The council did not respond to that. The image faded. The drone drifted back. The tall figure bowed deeply, not just to Lyra this time, but to Evan as well. "It seems," they said, "that today has changed more than one life." The crowd slowly began to move again. Doors opened wider. People stepped out, whispering, staring, talking excitedly. The child waved at Lyra. Lyra waved back. Evan let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "So," he said, "does this mean I get to go back to work?" Lyra turned to him. "If you wish." Evan nodded. "I think my supervisor is going to think I made up this entire story." Lyra smiled fully now. It was warm and real and not careful at all. "Perhaps that is for the best." They walked a few steps away from the group. The cloaked guards stayed back, giving them space. Lyra stopped. "You do not have to remember me as anything more than someone who shared a meal," she said. Evan scratched his head. "Hard to forget someone who almost started a galactic reform." She laughed softly. The sound made the heavy corridor feel lighter. "I will leave soon," she said. "My path will be different now." Evan nodded. "Yeah, mine too, probably. People don't usually bow to me at lunch." They stood in silence for a moment. "Thank you," Lyra said. "For the sandwich?" Evan asked. "For the choice," she replied. Evan looked at her, really looked at her. Not as a sovereign, not as a symbol, just as Lyra. "Anytime," he said. A soft signal echoed through the station, ships shifting, docks opening. Lyra took a step back. "Goodbye, Evan Hale." Evan raised a hand in a small wave. "Good luck, Lyra. Don't forget how to be small sometimes." She nodded, and for a moment she looked like the young woman who had stood by a vending machine, unsure if she was allowed to want something. Then she turned and walked away toward the waiting figures, toward the light and the wide galaxy beyond. Evan watched until she disappeared around a corner. The corridor felt normal again. Loud, busy, ordinary, Evan exhaled and headed back toward Dock Ring C. As he walked, he noticed people looking at him differently. Some smiled, some whispered, some nodded in quiet respect. Evan shook his head. "Great," he muttered. "Now I'm a legend and I still have to lift crates." But as he passed the cracked viewport near his old bench, he paused. The stars looked the same, but somehow they felt closer. Rimfall Station did not change overnight. The same freighters still docked with tired groans of metal. The same vendors still argued over prices. The same workers still complained about long shifts and broken machines. The air still smelled like recycled water and oil and too many people living too close together. But something had shifted. Evan felt it the next morning when he walked through Dock Ring C. People looked at him longer than usual. Some nodded. A few smiled. One old mechanic gave him a quiet thumbs up and said, "Nice walk you took yesterday." Evan pretended he didn't hear. He went back to moving crates, checking manifests, and fixing jammed cargo doors. His hands got dirty. His back started to ache. Life returned to its familiar shape. Still, every time he sat down for lunch at his usual bench near the cracked viewport, he half expected to see Lyra standing there, looking at the stars like she was trying to memorize them. Days passed, then weeks. News began to spread across the station, not the loud kind of news that came with alarms and warnings, the quiet kind, the kind people shared over meals and in low voices near vending machines. They said the sovereign had been seen walking through market streets on distant worlds, sitting with farmers on dust-covered planets, sharing tea with miners inside hollowed-out asteroids, listening to children who asked strange, honest questions. They said some rulers were angry, some were confused, some were inspired. They said the galaxy was changing. Evan tried not to think about it too much. He had a job, he had rent to pay, he had a sandwich to make every day. One afternoon, as he sat at his bench, he noticed a small group of travelers nearby. They were watching him, whispering. Finally, one of them stepped forward, a tall alien with bright eyes and patterned skin. "Are you the one?" they asked. Evan sighed. "I'm a lot of things." "You'll have to be more specific." "The one who spoke to her," the alien said. "The one who shared a meal." Evan leaned back. "I shared a lot of meals with a lot of people. You're going to have to narrow it down." The alien smiled. "The sovereign remembers you." Evan closed his eyes for a second. "Of course she does." The alien bowed slightly. "She asked that you be given this." They handed him a small, simple object, a thin metal band warm to the touch. No jewels, no markings. "What is it?" Evan asked. "A way to speak," the alien said. "If you ever wish to." Evan stared at it. "Speak to who?" "The galaxy," the alien replied. Evan laughed. "I barely speak to my supervisor." The alien's smile softened. "She said you would say that." They bowed again and walked away. Evan sat there for a long time, turning the band over in his hands. It felt heavier than it should have. He did not put it on, not yet. Life continued. Months passed. Rimfall Station gained a strange new reputation. Travelers came not just to trade, but to see the place where the first voice had shared a sandwich with the ruler of the stars. Evan hated the title. He kept working. He kept fixing things. He kept making his lunches better than they needed to be. Sometimes people sat with him. They talked about their homes, their fears, their hopes. Evan listened. He didn't give big speeches. He didn't give advice unless asked. He just listened. One day, a young girl from a water world sat beside him and asked, "Do you think rulers are just people?" Evan thought about Lyra standing in that bright corridor, choosing to be herself instead of a symbol. "Yeah," he said, "I think they forget sometimes, but yeah, they're just people." The girl nodded like she had been given a secret. Far away, Lyra stood on a balcony that overlooked a world covered in golden plains. Wind moved through tall grasses. The sky was wide and blue. She was not wearing robes of state. She wore simple clothes like the people around her. A group of farmers stood nearby, arguing about water channels. Lyra listened. She asked questions. She laughed when one of them made a joke. Later, alone, she looked at the stars. She touched a small device at her wrist. For a moment, she considered activating it. For a moment, she thought about hearing Evan's voice again, casual and honest. She didn't. Some connections were meant to stay quiet. Back on Rimfall, Evan finally put the metal band on his wrist. It didn't glow, it didn't hum, nothing happened. He went back to work. That night, as he lay in his small sleep pod, staring at the low ceiling, the band warmed slightly. A voice filled the room, not loud, not soft, just clear. "Evan Hale." He sat up so fast he hit his head. "Ow," he muttered. Yeah, I'm here." Lyra's voice sounded different. Stronger, calmer, but still hers. "I am standing on a world that smells like rain," she said. "I wanted to tell you." Evan rubbed his forehead and smiled. "That's nice. Rimfall smells like oil and regret." Lyra laughed. "I remember." They talked, not about politics. Not about the council. Not about empires. They talked about food, about strange animals, about how big the sky looked on open planets, about how small sleep pods felt on crowded stations. Sometimes weeks passed between their conversations, sometimes months. Neither of them rushed it. The galaxy kept changing. Some leaders followed Lyra's example, some didn't. There were arguments, there were meetings, there were moments of tension, but there were also moments of connection. People began telling stories about small kindnesses. About rulers who sat down to eat with workers, about soldiers who helped rebuild instead of just protect. They called it the sandwich moment. Evan hated that even more than the first voice. Years passed. Evan got older. His hair went gray at the edges. His back complained more loudly in the mornings. He moved from heavy cargo work to training new dockhands. He taught them how to lift properly, how to check seals, how to not get cheated by smugglers. Sometimes, when they asked about the rumors, he told them the truth. "I gave someone my lunch," he said. "That's it." Lyra changed too. She grew into her role in a way the council had never planned. She became known not just as a ruler, but as a traveler, a listener, a witness. Statues were built of her across worlds. Most showed her standing tall, looking toward the stars. On one small planet, a different statue appeared. It showed her sitting on a simple bench, holding half a sandwich. She saw it once, years later. She stood in front of it for a long time. "I was hungry that day," she said quietly. The guide beside her smiled. So was the galaxy. Back on Rimfall, Evan sat at his old bench one last time. The cracked viewport had been repaired years ago, but he still liked the spot. A young worker sat down beside him, nervous. "Is it true?" they asked. "Did you really meet her?" Evan looked at the stars. "Yeah, I did." "What was she like?" Evan thought about the way she had stared at vending machines, the way she had held the sandwich wrapper, the way she had asked what ordinary life looked like. "She was just someone who wanted to be seen," he said. The worker nodded, thoughtful. Evan stood up slowly. "All right, that's enough sitting around. Crates don't move themselves." The worker grinned and followed him. Far away on a world covered in snow, Lyra stood in silence as flakes fell around her. She lifted her face to the cold sky and smiled. She touched her wrist. "Evan," she said. The band on Evan's arm warmed. "Yeah," he replied, breathless from climbing a ladder. "Thank you," Lyra said, "for the day you changed my life." Evan leaned against the railing and looked out at the familiar stars. "You changed mine too," he said. They were quiet for a moment. Then Evan added, "If you ever come back to Rimfall, I'll make you a better sandwich." "I've improved the recipe." Lyra laughed, bright and free. "I will hold you to that." The connection faded. Evan climbed down and went back to work. The galaxy kept spinning. Worlds rose and fell. Stories were told and forgotten. But in ports and stations and homes across the stars, one small story remained. Not about wars, not about rulers, about a tired human who shared his lunch, and an empire that learned for a moment how to be human.